This is my 1965 MG Midget. It's a little British roadster. Very interesting cars, very different from just about anything else I've worked on. And it's getting a bigger engine. The old one was 1,098 cc's, and it put out mid-50s horsepower, which isn't too bad in a 1,500-pound car. They're pretty light. The new engine is 1,275 cc's. It puts out about 65 horsepower. Not a huge gain, but it's the more popular engine they have, so that's what I wanted to build it with. I built the engine a couple years ago and then kind of lost interest with the project. Here's that engine I built. It's ready to go, kind of shiny, got some fancy MG valve cover bolts on her, SU carburetors, which everybody hates. They're not so bad once you get them figured out. I went through this engine. It's in really good shape. I only paid $600 for it used. So I tore it down and went through it and put it back together with all new seals, fresh paint. Other interesting things about this, it's a positive earth car. I'll get to that, but that basically means your positive terminal from your battery goes to ground. But that's just one of the interesting things about this little car. This one also uniquely runs a Datsun 4-speed. It's out of like a 70s Datsun B210, I think, or just a 210. I can't remember. It's been a number of years since I researched the serial number, but I just had the transmission gone through. I figured since I went through the engine and I didn't want to put just a leaky old used Datsun transmission back in it for it to just have problems. It's got a new clutch. The engine has the new clutch on the back there. And you can see it's actually drilled for Datsun clutch. 1275, that number there. So yeah, two freshly gone through, fresh seals, all lubed up, dropping in. This will be ready to run for quite some time. Hopefully the new owners won't run into any problems. I am selling this car. Here's the old engine. That is the 1098 cc in baby blue. I spun a bearing in it a number of years back and just don't want to rebuild it because, like I said, this is the popular one to have in there. Okay, well, I'll give you one more look at the MG itself. This was from a dirt bike, so that'll clean off of there. But yeah, once I get the engine and transmission in and everything wired up and plumbed, I really just need to focus on the interior, which I had made a lot of progress on. It's all fully dynamatted, as you can kind of see. So it's it feels real solid and it's real quiet going down the road. But let's get this engine dropped in here. And that'll be a really good start on getting this car all wrapped up and finished. And poof, just like that, the engine and transmission are back in. I didn't record that process because it's not quite appropriate for YouTube. It requires quite a lot of cursing to shoehorn this in here. I've had the other engine in and out of here a number of times, and this one's now been put in twice. But it's in, it's just resting in place. It's not actually mounted to its motor mounts or transmission mounts. I did get the drive shaft hooked up to the transmission. So I'm going to crawl under there and start with the very back first and work my way forward. Connect the drive shaft to the rear axle, and then mount the transmission and slave cylinder for your clutch, and just keep coming forward. I like to start from the back rather than the front. If I start with the front motor mounts, I found it really hard to get the transmission bolts in, or the transmission mount bolts in. I don't know if that's the same for all of these or just the ones with this particular Datsun transmission and conversion. But let's get started. I'm underneath the MG now, obviously. Got pretty much everything under here good to go for at least a test start. I might need to come down and change up a couple things, and I need to finish the exhaust install, but it's wedged together well enough for a good test start. Got the transmission mounted. Got a real quality ground strap around here. Red is the acceptable color for this, being a positive earth setup, but yeah, that needs to be replaced. We're gonna pretend we didn't see that for the time being. Again, this is a Datsun transmission, so it's pretty interesting when you're working on an SAE British car, and you got to remember at what point the bolts change over to metric. So even our slave cylinder here for the clutch, you can see mounted on the side there. Those bolts are metric. And yeah, there's a couple others, but you just got to remember where you are in the build. So yeah, that's all mounted. You can see the MG's not in bad shape. It's a good car. That was the original color there that you kind of see in the back. It's like a off-white, light ivory kind of color. Pretty classy color for these little cars. And the interior was red, but somebody changed that a long time ago. But you can see no rust, good solid floor pans. And that is a solid bottom of the transmission there, so it is very hard to access the drive shaft or the transmission. You have to drag it all out at once pretty much. So that's why I didn't record the process of me putting all this in. Maybe it's just because I always do it myself, but yeah, there's a lot of cursing to get this in here for one person, but I always manage. We are going to finish installing the engine. So we're down to plumbing and electrical. Those are my options. I hate plumbing. I don't like plumbing in the house. I don't like plumbing, period. So it's not my expertise. So I'm better at electrical. I'm just going to start with the electrical to cruise through. It's a very simple system, other than being positive earth. You just have to keep that in the back of your mind, just as switching between metric and SAE on this. One way to easily tell on an old car, especially an MG, a lot of times it'll be labeled. This is how I knew the previous owner had it wrong. Is if you look right there at the speedometer, sorry, the tachometer, right down there in tiny, it actually says positive earth, 4-cylinder. Maybe it's 4-cycle, 4-cylinder. But pretty neat old car. I'll have to remember what all the switches do because I didn't label them. Fuel gauge, water temp gauge, oil pressure, and choke obviously, but let's finish this electrical. We make sure the fuel pump fires, make sure the fuel, yes, this does have an electric fuel pump. It was converted before I bought it. I was okay with that. But we'll make sure that pressurizes the fuel filter. Make sure there's no fuel leaks. That'll be good and simple. And then some vacuum lines. I probably won't hook up the cooling system until I make sure it barks off. Make some noise. Again, I haven't heard this engine run. I brought it home used, $600. I was told it was good. It looked good on the inside when I broke it down, so I have no reason to believe it isn't good and won't run. Took me a couple hours. Not in any hurry, but I've got everything ready for a test start. Let's talk positive earth. Heard me mention it a couple times now working on this car. I think it's interesting. And a lot of people convert it, but let's talk about it. Positive side of my battery, hot side as they call it somewhere, positive happy cable. It's actually over here grounded to the engine. Whereas the negative side runs to my starter solenoid. And this cable shouldn't be red, but runs down to the starter. The hot positive side of my coil is grounded. And that's how this car was designed. Some people convert them over to alternators, negative earth, do away with the voltage regulators, and kind of bring them more into the times. But I'm leaving this one. I like it. It's unique. It still runs a generator. Generator is DC output, whereas an alternator is AC output. So a lot of people will change all that over. But I liked it, just the way it was. It's a pretty neat car, and I learned a lot. A lot can be learned about SU carbs, and a lot can be learned about Lucas Electronics. You talk to anybody who works on British cars, old British cars, they will tell you Lucas Electronics and SU carbs can be a real pain in the butt. But it is what it is. So I've got everything that I basically need. I need fuel, air, compression, spark, some timing. I've got a little bit of, I left the nuts loose, the bolts rather loose on the distributor so that I can adjust the timing as I get into starting it. But no cooling system, no radiator. The belt's not even on the crank or the water pump because the generator isn't on yet. So no cooling system and no charging system just yet. I want to turn the key, which I haven't done yet, and see if we get fuel pressure from the fuel pump. It is electric now up back there, so I'll hear it. You might hear it too. As long as there's no fuel leaks and there's no fire, no smoke, nothing's getting hot, anything like that, well then I think we should be able to start turning the key and get some rotations in it and see if it fires. Let's do it. Come on. Getting fuel in the fuel filter. That's great. The battery sounds a little weak. It pressurized though. I hope the battery's strong enough to turn this tiny little motor engine. I think we try it. Nothing's like weirdly hot. There's no smoke, fire. Which means I should have gotten everything wired up right. I've got the choke wired open, straight wired open with some baling wire, and I hooked up the throttle cable. Spring's not very strong though. Let's try it. See what happens. I see a little bit of smoke. Maybe just dust. Let's check some things. Checking. Everybody's good there. Use a drop or two, but it's got oil. On the oil pump's pumping. Just going to adjust the distributor slightly. Let's check and see if we have spark. Just take a look at number one and see what number one thinks. And this is always really hard to see on a camera. Maybe you guys will be able to see it. See any spark. I don't know if this coil's any good. Even if timing was off, it should still be getting spark. Turning back to work on the 65 MG engine swap. Last time we got it to crank, but no spark. I messed up. I made a mistake, all while talking about positive ground, positive earth wiring, how all that's wired up between your battery, your distributor, and your coil. My autopilot just kicked in anyway. And while I was wiring up the electronic ignition module by Pertronix, my brain automatically wired this to ground. So when I turned that ignition on with the key, I heard a tiny little pop. I wasn't sure what it was. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after more troubleshooting, checked the coil, checked everything. Pertronix had a test online for checking the module. I blew it. I even tried just wiring that to the negative side where it was supposed to go, because this one's positive. It still didn't work, so I blew it. It was a costly mistake. $225 to replace this tiny little module. And you can't buy just the module. I had to order a whole new Pertronix. But my other option was just to throw the points back in, the old point system, and set those and wish the new owner well. But I think as a selling point, with all the work that I've done, I wanted to have electronic ignition. So just a costly mistake. Let's install the new Pertronix module and hope that we have spark. I don't know why we wouldn't after this. These generally work pretty well. I've never had one fail. I got that new ignition module wired in. Got the distributor cap back on and wired to the coil. Let's bring the camera in here a little closer. So we can take a good look at it. Got everything loosely wired up that is necessary. Like I said, I'll tidy that up once we verify that we have spark. But I've got my spark tester in line on cylinder number 1 here. Put the battery back in, and it's wired up for positive earth. Let's try to start it. Let's see if we get spark, or see if it even barks off. Any sign of life? I think there will be. We're getting fuel pressure. I can hear the float bowls filling. And it stopped. That's great. We have pressure. Let's see if she starts. It's great news though. I don't know if you can see that on the camera with refresh rates. I know it's really hard sometimes, even watching other shows. Sometimes the refresh rate of your camera doesn't capture it. But I could see this sparking strong while cranking on it. I smell fuel, so we're getting fuel. It's probably timing at this point because I have not lined up any of the timing, except for everything behind the timing cover. So it's just our distributor at this point that has to be off. I'm gonna pull the vacuum advance off. This is 3/8. 3/8 anyway. One step closer, we have spark, we have fuel, we have air, because I'm breathing, and I'm not dead, and I'm not in space. Okay, vacuum advance off. I also don't know if the distributor is 180 off. That could be another no start issue, but easy enough to troubleshoot. Let's see. Much closer. It's trying to fire over. Even got a little puff of smoke out of her. Not sure where, but it's okay. That was an attempted fire over. Or turnover. Attempted fire. Yeesh. That kind of sounds 180 off, actually. It doesn't sound too hot. Yeah, she's kind of coughing. Firing on the wrong stroke, on the wrong cylinder. Let's double check. So we know we have spark. I'm gonna take this off. Wires on. Cap wrong, but it'll reach for now. We just have to sort those. Oh. Sure. I just found the keys to my pickup truck. Been looking for those for a couple days. They're in the Opal. It's a good place to keep keys and one of your classics. Just didn't feel how it would snap. Spark plugs are just a little loose. I kind of just hand tightened them in there. SUs are free, SU carburetors. Let me give it a little gas this time. Nope, that doesn't sound right. That sounds 180 off. So, that means is we are going to pull the cap off the distributor. Try not to catch anything on fire while doing so. Let's pull that off the coil. Get it out of the way. Now, we need to pull the bolt out of the distributor, bolts that hold it in. It's a shame the threads aren't longer on these bolts. They don't need to be. See if I can drop a washer. Okay. We got a circle. 180 off means we need the rotor to point 180 degrees differently. So we're going to pull the distributor out a bit. Turn the rotor 180 degrees. Try to get her to line up with the gears again. It doesn't seem to want to go in at 180. Don't recall if these can only really go in one direction. It would be nice, it would be helpful. Prevent you from accidentally getting at 180 off, but it doesn't want to seat at 180 difference. I can feel where it's trying. To go in one way. Okay, then we need to double check our firing order as we put all this back together. I've now got the valve cover off. Really backed up our checks for timing here because it's trying to start, but the behaviors and the hiccups and the puffs of smoke, backfires, all of that tells me it's a timing problem. So I've pulled the valve cover off. These are your rockers, rocker arms, valve springs. This is the top of your head. On a 4-cylinder, I like to verify that the crank and the cam are in sync properly with the timing chain by pulling the valve cover. So I've got number 1 here, and this rocker's loose, and this rocker's loose. This means both of these valves, the intake valve and the exhaust valve, are closed. That means cylinder number 1 is at top dead center. And I can also verify that by checking the 3rd cylinder, which is the next in the firing order. Its intake valve is open, so it's letting fuel in on the intake stroke. The exhaust valve is loose, tells me it's closed, which is where number 3 should be if number 1 is in top dead center on the compression stroke. Hope that's not too much for you, but again, when you run the screwdriver test, you'll find that the piston here is at the very top, and this one I can't even feel. It's all the way at the bottom. And the timing mark on the crankshaft lines up with the timing marks. So all that was well, but my distributor, it has an adjustment ring on it. And I can probably better describe this with a spare distributor that I have. So this is the adjustment ring, and it has a slotted adjustment there for small corrections to advancing and retarding the timing. I hadn't adjusted that ring. It was exactly where it was on my old engine. I assumed it couldn't be too far off. But when I rotated the distributor with no nuts here, there was quite a bit difference in where this needed to be before I saw my timing light. Let me see if I can catch that for you, because that's a really important part as to how I typically time top dead center and verify that I'm getting spark to number 1 all at the same time. So I've got my light in there. I'm going to turn the ignition on. I need power to be able to send voltage through the coil to our distributor and to our spark plug here. So let's see. How well I can demonstrate this. Let's watch this. I'm gonna just rotate this distributor back and forth until we kind of hear a pop and see that flash. That tells me that I've got number 1 lined up. Okay, I heard it. Right there. Don't want to move anything now. I don't think I could see it very well on there, but I could hear it and I can see it if I watch closely. Not at the camera. So that tells me we've got the distributor in the right spot. I'm now going to hand tighten that. Let's put some spark plugs in it for the 20th time now. Again, I haven't run this engine before. I got it used. I paid $600 for it. It was said to be good, of course. so I've never heard it run. I don't know if it runs really well or if we're gonna fill the garage with smoke when it does fire. I expect smoke. Oh, I left the ignition on. Let's turn the ignition off. Burning up our battery. It's our last battery. I gotta go buy more batteries. I can feel it. This is gonna be it. One. God, it barely reaches. This must be like Ford Pinto plug wires. 1, number 3 counterclockwise. Just remember which way you're turning and you're here. 1, 3. And our very bottom one there. Going to number 4. And lastly, number 2. 1, 3, 4, 2. Okay. I'm not even going to put the valve cover on. I'll be happy if I get some oil pressure. So we're all tightened, wired up. I'm not going to worry about vacuum advance. It's this guy. We're running. Should be running. Idle's off. But she's running. Woo! Fire and wall. Those cobwebs out. Keep it running. Really need to be checking for fuel pressure right now, so it's running. The gauge didn't read fuel pressure, but that should be hooked up. We should be getting a lot more oil up here. We should be making a pretty good mess. So it runs, but we have no oil pressure. Son of a gun. Baby steps. Okay, I was able to figure out the oil pressure problem. All I did was prime all the oil systems with oil, since everything was basically dry. The engine had been disassembled and then reassembled, so there is an oil line that runs from the oil filter unit. You can see it, that's copper here. And that runs from the pump down to the oil filter. There's a lot in the way now. There wasn't so much in the way earlier. But as soon as I got oil pressure, oh, I was excited. So I immediately bolted on our generator. This does use a generator, not an alternator. And put the radiator in for cooling. So we have oil pressure, we have a generator, and we have a radiator that's partially filled with coolant. Let's see how she's doing now. Let's double check and make sure we don't see any leaks. Let's see how it runs. And yeah, we'll check for oil pressure again. Just choke that a tiny bit. Choke the hell out of it, I guess. Timing is probably still a degree or 5 out, but let's see. That there is temperature and oil pressure. Pretty neat old car. Doesn't look like we have any fuel. No tack. So I gotta plug the tack in. It's not wired in yet, but by golly, she runs and she almost idles smoothly. One step closer.